Guys, this is Aker and welcome to New Dragon Stories, where dragon fantasy comes alive. I'm your narrator, and together we will explore the worlds of fire, courage, and forgotten legends.
The bolt on the outer panel had been loose for 3 weeks. Bren Calloway had been meaning to fix it since the first frost, but there was always something else: a cracked water line, a failing heat coil, a section of roof that needed resealing before the mountain winds came down and made the decision for him. The homestead was old, everything on it needed attention. Bren had learned to rank his problems, and the bolt was somewhere in the middle, behind the things that would kill him and ahead of the things that merely annoyed him. He was on the roof when the snow started, not a polite snow, the kind that came off the northern peaks sideways, the kind that made the colony settlement 2 kilometers downhill invisible inside 10 minutes. He got down fast, pulled his tools, sealed the access hatch, and went inside to make something hot and wait out the night. He was on his second cup when something scraped against the door. He set the cup down, listened. Wind, probably. The homestead was on the edge of the cleared land, and the tree line was close enough that branches sometimes caught in the gusts and dragged across the outer hull. It happened every winter. He picked the cup back up. It came again, slower this time, 3 distinct points of contact spaced evenly. Not a branch. Bren was not a man who frightened easily. He had spent 11 years doing surface surveys on worlds that had not finished deciding whether they wanted to tolerate human presence. He had seen things that moved in ways that didn't make sense and learned to be still and quiet and watch before he did anything else. He did that now. He sat with his cup and he listened, and he counted the seconds between sounds. The third time it came in a clear pattern: knock, knock, knock. He got up. He did not grab a weapon. He told himself this was because the door was reinforced and he was safe regardless, and this was partially true. He looked through the visual port on the door and he saw it. The creature was about the size of a large working dog, though shaped nothing like one. It stood on 4 legs with folded wings pressed tight against a narrow body. The scales were a dark gray, nearly the color of wet stone, and they were crusted along the neck and shoulders with ice. The head was triangular, the eyes a pale amber, and they were looking directly at the visual port with an expression Bren could not name but recognized: the particular stillness of something that is cold and tired and has decided that the next few seconds are going to determine a great deal. He stood there, the creature stood there. After a moment it raised one foreleg and knocked again, 3 times, patient. Bren undid the lock. He opened the door 2 handspans and stopped. Cold air poured in. The creature did not lunge, did not hiss, did not move at all except to lower its foreleg back to the ground. It looked at him. The amber eyes moved from his face to the warm interior behind him and back to his face. It said in a voice like gravel settling, warm. Bren looked at it for a long moment. He looked at the ice along its neck. He looked at the way it was holding its left wing slightly raised, not a display, the way he'd read about threat behavior, more like something that hurt. He opened the door the rest of the way and stepped to the side. Equipment bay, he said and pointed, not the living quarters in there. The creature looked at the bay, it looked at him, it walked in. It was careful, it did not knock anything over, which was more than Bren could say for most humans he'd invited inside. It turned twice in the space slowly and then settled in the far corner away from the machinery, folding itself down with the tired precision of something that has been moving for too long. Bren locked the outer door. He went to the storage shelf and pulled out a water basin, filled it from the utility tap and set it inside the bay entrance. He looked at his protein rations, thought about what 11 years of surveying had taught him about caloric needs in cold weather, and put half his evening portion in a bowl beside the water. The creature watched him do all of this without moving. Bren stepped back to the bay entrance. I'm locking this door, he said and gestured to the interior lock between the bay and the living quarters, not because I think you will cause trouble, because I sleep better with a locked door between me and things I don't understand, no offense. The creature said nothing. Its eyes were already dimming, not death, he realized. Sleep, the fast, heavy sleep of something that has been cold for too long and has finally found somewhere it does not have to be cold anymore. He locked the door. He did not sleep much. He sat in his chair and listened for sounds from the bay, and there were none, and around the 4th hour of the night he decided that was answer enough. In the morning he unbolted the bay from the inside. The creature was gone, the water basin was empty, the bowl was empty, the empty containers had been moved carefully to one side and stacked, rim to rim, the way you'd set dishes out before washing them. Bren stood there in the cold air from the open outer door and looked at the stacked bowls for a long time. He picked up the bowls, he washed them, he went to his desk and opened the colony incident report form, and he sat there, and after a while he closed it without writing anything. He told himself there was nothing to report. He almost believed it. There is a particular kind of waiting that is not quite hopping. Bren did not let himself hope. He filed it under observation instead, which was a word he could live with, and over the months between winters he did what any reasonable man would do after finding something impossible on his porch. He researched. The Galactic Union's xenological database had 41 entries on dragon species. 37 of them were filed under Tier 3 threat classification, which meant do not approach, do not engage, report, and withdraw. The other 4 were historical records of dragons that were already dead. The living entries included survey notes on territorial range, estimated population numbers that made Bren feel something quiet and bleak, and a single behavioral study conducted at enormous distance by a Vrethali research team who had clearly written the entire paper from behind a very thick wall. Nothing in any of it described a hatchling that knocked on doors. He did find one line buried in a population study from 60 years ago: hatchlings separated from clutch guardians before their 2nd year are presumed lost, no recovery cases recorded. He read that line several times, then he closed the database and went to fix the loose bolt, which he had finally remembered to do, and did not think about it any further. Or so he told himself. The first snow of the 2nd winter came on a Tuesday in the late afternoon when the light was already going gray over the mountains. Bren had been watching the sky since morning, not waiting, observing. He was at the door before the knock came. He opened it and found Rook on the porch because he had named it by then in the privacy of his own head without meaning to. Rook was larger, not shocking larger, but noticeably so, the way a child looks different after a summer away. The ice on the scales was thinner this time, which meant it had not traveled as far or had traveled smarter. Bren had spent 3 months expanding the equipment bay. He had cleared the side wall, anchored an insulated cargo mesh to the floor in the corner, and welded a wider water basin to the utility line so it stayed unfrozen. It looked like a proper shelter for something that needed one. He had told himself he was reorganizing storage. He stepped back without saying anything and gestured to the bay. Rook walked in and stopped. It looked at the mesh bedding, it looked at the basin, it looked at the cleared wall space, then it looked at Bren with those amber eyes, and it said clearly in Galactic standard that was rough but deliberate, "You remembered." Bren crossed his arms. "You came back." It wasn't an answer to what Rook had said, but Rook seemed to understand it was one. Anyway, that night Bren did not lock the interior door. Over the following weeks something shifted. Rook's language got better faster. Then seemed reasonable, but nothing about Rook was reasonable by standard measures, so Bren stopped measuring by those. It asked questions the way water found cracks, quietly, persistently, without apparent ego. Why did Bren live alone? Why did he stay when others left? What was the purpose of the carved wooden thing on the shelf above the heater? That last one took Bren a moment. He picked it up. My daughter made it, she was 8. Where is she now? Offworld, has been for years. Rook processed this. You keep the object because she is gone. I keep it because she made it. Rook was quiet for a time and then said, that is a different reason than I expected. The colony found out on a Thursday. which was the worst possible day because director Shin held her weekly administrative review on Thursdays, and there was therefore a full room of people when the report came in. A colonist named Ferris who ran the Eastern Feed Depot had spotted Rook moving along the tree line at dawn and had done exactly what regulations required. Shin called Brennan that same afternoon. She was not unkind about it, she was also not unclear. She sat across from him in her small office with its view of the settlement's main square, and she put the Galactic Union Charter on the desk between them and pointed to the relevant clause without drama. Tier 3 threat species, colony presence required immediate report to Union defense. Coordination, active deterrence grid to be enabled. Bren asked, has it done anything threatening? Shin said no. Has it caused damage to property, to animals, to any person? No. Then what exactly are we reporting? Shin looked at him steadily. That it exists here, Bren, that's enough under this law. He sat with that. I need a few days. I can give you that, she said. I want to be clear that I am giving it to you and that I expect something from you at the end of it. He nodded and left and did not discuss it with Rook because he was not sure how to begin that conversation and because some part of him was still deciding what he was going to do. On the last day of the grace period, he went into the equipment bay in the evening and sat down on a crate across from Rook, who was awake and watching him. There are people who want to know you are here, Bren said, official people. With the authority to decide what happens to you based on what kind of thing they think you are. Rook was quiet. Then, what kind of thing do you think I am? Bren thought about the stacked bowls, the question about the wooden carving, the way Rook had looked at the prepared bay not with relief, but with something more careful. Something that understood what preparation meant and had not expected to be prepared for. I think you are something those rules were not written for, Bren said. He did not file the report. When winter ended and Rook left, it did something it had not done before. It stopped at the edge of the tree line and looked back at the homestead for a long moment. Then it set something on the flat rock at the boundary of Bren's land, a stone, dark and glassy, small enough to fit in a closed fist. When Bren picked it up, it was warm. It stayed warm for 3 days. He put it on the shelf beside his daughter's carving. By the 4th winter, Ferris had stopped reporting it. So had the 3 other colonists who had seen Rook moving through the tree line at various hours. There was no agreement about this, no meeting held, no decision made. Out loud, it simply stopped happening. People saw and noted and said nothing to anyone official. Bren didn't ask them to, he didn't thank them either. It was the kind of thing that lost meaning if you named it. Rook arrived earlier in the 4th year, before the heavy snow, while the ground was still just cold and the sky still merely gray rather than committed. It was big enough now that the equipment bay required some renegotiation of what went where. The cargo mesh had been replaced with layered insulating panels along the entire corner wall. There was a secondary heat coil Bren had wired in during the summer, routed off the main line. He had told the colony maintenance log it was for pipe protection. That winter they spent most evenings outside, on the sheltered side of the homestead, where the mountain blocked the worst of the wind. Bren in his heated survey suit, Rook radiating enough warmth from its own body that the space between them was bearable. They had gotten past the stage of questions and answers and into something slower. The kind of talking that was not really about information anymore. On one of those nights when the sky had gone fully dark and the distant lights of the settlement made a pale smear on the snow below, Rook said, I want to tell you a thing. I have not told anything else. Bren said, all right. There was a long pause, not uncertainty. Bren had learned to tell Rook's silences apart. This was the pause of something choosing the right shape for words it had carried for a very long time. I was not lost, Rook said, I was put out. Bren did not say anything. Rook continued. My parent was one of the old ones. I do not know if old means wise in your language. The way it does in mine it means surviving. Old means you did not make the kinds of errors that were survivable. My parent was old. The cold shifted around them. Somewhere in the trees something moved and was quiet. I was wrong from the beginning, not the body was acceptable, the mind. I looked at things I was told to not look at, I came close to things I was told to avoid. I asked questions and my parent answered once, twice, and on the third time. Struck me hard enough that I understood questions were finished. Bren's hands were still in his lap, he didn't move. When I was still small enough to be in danger alone, my parent drove me to the edge of the territory and stopped. I thought at first it was a lesson that I would be left for a day or a night and then collected. That is a thing the old ones do. I waited. 2 days, 3, I called out in the way that hatchlings call and my parent was gone. And the territory was empty and I understood. Rook's voice had not changed, that was almost harder than if it had. It said something before it left, the last thing, it said, "You are not what a dragon is, you will die as what you are, I will not watch it." Bren was quiet for a moment, then he said, "That is a cruel thing to do to someone for being curious." "It is the dragon way," Rook said. "The ones who are alive are the ones who stayed separate, who did not look at other things and wonder, who did not come close." My parent was not wrong about survival. The dead ones were the ones who were like me. "That's not the only way to survive," Bren said. "So I have been finding out," Rook said. Bren thought about a creature young, still small, still in the size range where things ate you alone on a world it had never been shown how to live on, he thought. About that first winter, the ice on the scales, the careful knock, the way it had stacked the empty bowls. "How did you find this place?" he said. "I did not find it, I found a place to be cold in that was not the open ground, and that place was near here, and when the worst night came I moved toward the light." "Just the light?" "There were many lights, the settlement, your homestead, I came to yours because it was separate, I thought a separate thing might not call others." Bren almost smiled. "Smart." "I was very cold," Rook said. "Smart was what I had left." They sat in the quiet for a while, the settlement lights were steady in the valley. "My parent was right that I was not what a dragon is," Rook said eventually. "I have understood that for a long time, I have been trying to understand what I am instead. I find I have not figured it out, but I think I am figuring out what I am near." Bren looked at the valley lights and thought about his daughter's carving on the shelf. And the warm stone beside it and the loose bolt he had finally fixed. He thought about 11 years of surveying worlds that were indifferent to him, and the one world he had stayed on and why. "That's usually how it works," he said. Rook made a sound low in its chest that Bren had learned over 4 winters. It was the sound it made when something landed in the right place. They stayed outside until the cold got through even the heated suit, and then Bren went in and Rook settled into the bay with the new wall panels, and the mountain came down dark over both of them, and it was enough. 3 days later, on his weekly walk to the settlement for supplies, Bren passed Ferris. At the depot gate, Ferris nodded, nothing was said. Bren nodded back and kept walking. The colony knew what it was sheltering. It had decided it was all right with that. The Union ship came down on a clear day, which felt like an insult. Bad news in Bren's experience had the decency to arrive in bad weather. It set the right mood, but the sky the morning the Galactic Union inspection vessel broke orbit and requested colony landing coordinates was a hard, pale blue without a cloud in it, and the light on the snow was almost pleasant, and none of that helped. Bren heard about it from Director Shin before the ship even touched ground. She came to his homestead herself, which told him everything about the weight of what was coming. She stood on his porch with her hands in her coat pockets and told him that the Union had been reviewing long-range survey data for the past year, that the data included thermal and motion signatures from the mountain range, that analysts had flagged a recurring pattern, large, non-colony, non-wildlife contact with the settlement edge. They had been watching longer than anyone knew. "Who is coming?" Bren asked. "A counselor, Vrethali, his name is Drev Nashin." Shin paused. "He has the authority to order active deterrence. I want you to understand that before you walk into any room with him." Bren understood. Active deterrence was a clean term for a thing that was not clean. The formal hearing was held 2 days later in the colony's administrative center, which was a large word for a mid-sized room with a long table and chairs that had never quite matched. Nashin was already seated when Bren arrived. He was tall, thin, with the gray blue coloring of his species, and he looked at Bren with eyes that were not hostile. Which was almost worse. Hostile would have been easier to stand across from. Nashin laid out the case without theatrics: the regulation, the satellite data, the risk profile. His species had a history with dragons that went back 200 years. And across 4 colony worlds, and he spoke about it the way someone speaks about a fire. They survived, not angry, just certain. Certain in the way that only grief can make a person certain. When he finished, he said, "I am not here to punish anyone. I am here because the regulation exists to protect lives, and I believe it does that." Shin said, "Counselor, Bren has something to present." Bren had spent the 2 days since Shin's visit at his desk. He was a surveyor. Recording was what he did. He had a record. He put it on the table. 6 years of winter visits, documented in the same format he had used for every surface survey he'd ever filed: date, duration, behavior observed, outcome. Neat columns, no editorializing, just what had happened and what had not happened. He said, "Nothing in that record is approximate. I wrote it at the time of observation. Every winter, every visit, 41 nights total across 6 years." He tapped the last page. Incidents 0, property damage 0, threat display 0, aggression toward colony personnel, animals, or equipment 0. Nashin read it. He read it carefully, which Bren had not expected. He turned pages without rushing. When he finished, he set it down and folded his hands on top of it. "This is a record of what has not happened," Nashin said. "Yes," Bren said, "it is also a record over 6 years. That is a long time for nothing to happen if something dangerous is waiting to happen. Patience is not beyond this species." "Neither is language," Bren said. "Rook speaks galactic standard, not commands. Language, it asks questions, it has opinions. Last winter it asked me why humans build things they do not need for survival. That is not the question of a weapon waiting for the right moment. That is the question of something that wants to understand the world." Nashin was quiet. Shin said carefully, "Counselor, I should tell you that the colony's decision not to file earlier reports was not Bren's alone. My staff knew, several colonists knew. No one filed. That is not one man's judgment, that is a settlement's." Before Nashin could respond, the room's external monitor pinged. Someone at the monitoring desk said, in a voice that was trying to be neutral, "There is something in the central square." Nashin looked at the monitor. So did Bren, so did everyone in the room. Rook was in the center of the colony square, not at the tree line, not at the homestead boundary, in the square where the paths crossed and the notice board stood. It was sitting on its haunches in the snow, wings folded, and it was looking at the administrative building. It was not moving, it was simply there, visible in the open, waiting. Nashin stared at the monitor for a long time. Then he said very quietly, "What is it doing?" Shin said, "Something it was told not to do." Bren said, "It is showing you it's here. It knows this meeting is happening. It knows you are deciding what it is, and it is giving you the chance to look at it first before you decide." The room was completely still. Nashin stood up slowly. He walked to the window and looked out at the square, not the monitor, the actual window across the actual distance. Rook did not react, it just sat in the snow and looked back. The counselor stood there for a long time. He did not order the deterrence response. He ordered a 90-day formal xenological assessment, a union specialist to observe, evaluate, and submit findings before any action was taken. It was procedure, it was delay, it was for now enough. As he left for his shuttle, Nashin stopped on the steps and spoke without turning around. "If it gives you reason to be afraid, once you will report it." "I know," Bren said. A pause. "I am not your enemy." "I know that too," Bren said. Nashin walked on. His shadow went long and thin across the snow, and then he was gone. And Bren stood on the steps in the cold and looked out at the square where Rook was finally quietly moving back toward the tree line. The Union sent Sable Calloway. Bren found out via a standard transit notification, the kind the colony received for Any arriving personnel, it listed her credentials: licensed xenobiologist, independent. Specialist union contract reference 7 gamma assess. He read her name twice, then set the notification face down on the desk and went outside to check the water line, which did not need checking. His daughter landed on a freight shuttle 4 days later and walked off with one large bag and the expression of someone who had already had the argument she was about to have. She was 31 now. She had her mother's eyes and Bren's habit of not saying more than necessary, which meant their first 10 minutes in the same space were almost completely silent. She set her bag down, she looked at the homestead, she said, "I requested reassignment." "I know," Bren said. "They denied it. Conflict of interest is apparently not grounds when you are the only qualified specialist who will take the contract. Do you want something to eat?" She looked at him. "Yes, fine." Rook was in the bay. It had arrived 3 days before Sable, the winter not yet fully committed but the air getting there. When Bren brought Sable to the bay entrance and opened the door, Rook was awake and already watching. It looked at Sable. Sable looked at Rook. Rook looked at Bren. "Your daughter," Rook said. "Yes," Bren said. "She looks at things the way you look at things." Sable said under her breath, "Wonderful." She was professional about it. Bren gave her that, whatever she felt about the assignment, about him, about the complicated overlap of both, she did the work properly. She set up observation equipment, she ran behavioral protocols, she tested language comprehension, response to stress signals, territorial impulse, social boundary awareness. She was patient and methodical, and she wrote everything down. Rook engaged with all of it with genuine interest, which Bren suspected made Sable's job both easier and harder. It answered her tests and then asked her about the tests, what they were measuring, what the expected results were for other species, whether she had done this kind of work before and what she had found. It was, Sable said to Bren, at the end of the second week, disconcerting to be studied by your own subject. Bren said, "How do you think I felt for 6 years?" She almost smiled, almost. The work went on through the cold months. The three of them developed a kind of routine. Sable's sessions with Rook in the afternoons, evenings with all three in the outside space by the homestead wall, the conversation ranging from formal to something less formal. As the weeks passed, Sable and Bren argued about tools and about shelf space and about the state of the water recycler. This was, in its way, also a kind of routine. One evening Rook said to Sable, "Why do you stay away from someone you miss?" Sable was quiet for a moment. "It is complicated." Rook said, "I have found that humans say that when the answer is simple and painful." Sable looked at Rook, then she looked at Bren. Bren looked at the mountains. Nothing was said, but something shifted, the way things shift when the right words get spoken, even if they were said to the wrong person. The assessment data was, Sable told him near the end, unlike anything in the existing literature. Rook's language acquisition curve was far beyond documented dragon norms. Its behavior showed none, not reduced, not managed, not suppressed, but none of the aggression markers that defined Tier 3 classification, and there was a finding Sable kept returning to in her notes. Rook had been adapting, not performing human behavior. Adapting, observing how humans indicated meaning beyond words, how they signaled comfort or caution, and adjusting its own communication to be readable across the gap. "It is trying to be understood," she told Bren, "not to deceive, not to survive. Inspection, it genuinely wants to be understood. I have studied 6 species. I have never seen that in a first contact behavioral record." "What does that mean for your report?" "It means my report is going to make some people very uncomfortable," she said, "and it is going to be accurate regardless." She submitted it to the Union 3 days before the end of the assessment window. Bren did not ask to read it. She showed it to him anyway, the final paragraph, which said, "The colonists of this settlement have, without formal training or institutional support, achieved what 2 centuries of Union policy has not, a sustained, peaceful, mutually beneficial relationship with a member of a species previously considered irreconcilable. The Union should study how this occurred, not debate whether the outcome is permissible." Bren read it twice. They won't like that, he said. No, Sable said. They'll say you are compromised, conflict of interest. They will, and the data will still be the data. She stayed. She had a 6-month post at the colony, nominally for continued observation. And she took it fully rather than returning to orbit after the report. She moved her bag into the homestead's second room, which had been storage for years. They argued about that too. It was, Bren thought, the most like a family they had been in a long time. Rook watched all of this with obvious attention. One evening it said, I think you two are similar in a way that makes it difficult. Bren said probably. Rook said I also think that is all right, difficult is not wrong. Sable from inside the homestead where the window was cracked open, I can hear you. I know, Rook said, I intended that. Bren did not try to hide the fact that he was smiling. The Galactic Union's response arrived in spring, in a document 47 pages long. Bren read the summary, which was 3 pages, and the conclusion, which was 2 sentences. He did not read the middle. Sable read all of it, made notes in the margins, and then set it on the kitchen table without saying anything. The silence told him most of what he needed to know. The Union had not accepted Sable's proposed new classification. That would have required full council review, committee process, formal petitions from at least 3 member species, years of work, and no guarantee of outcome. What they had issued instead was a non-interference order, specific to this colony, specific to this individual. Rook was, in the language of the document, placed under administrative observation pending classification review, not cleared, not condemned. Held in the space between, which was where institutions put things they did not yet know how to name. Bren set the document in the recycler. Sable retrieved it. We may need it, she said. I know, he said, I just needed to do that. She put it back on the table. They had been arguing less lately, or rather, arguing about different things. The arguments about shelf space and the water recycler had gradually become arguments about the colony's long-term infrastructure plans and what Sable was going to do with the research post when it ended in 2 months. These were better arguments to have. They were the kind that assumed a future. The colony did not wait for the Union to be ready. A week after the document arrived, Director Shin signed a municipal works order for expansion of the Eastern Homestead Equipment Bay. The official reason was infrastructure support for ongoing xenological contact research. It went into the colony record that way, formal and plain. The expanded bay was built with colony labor, colony materials, and colony funds, and it was designated on the settlement map as a xenological contact shelter. Ferris did the outer wall framing. He did not comment on it, he just did it well. The second thing came from Nashin. It was not a message to Bren, it was addressed to Rook, a Union communication channel, formal letterhead delivered through the colony's official relay. Bren brought it to the bay and handed it over without reading it. Rook read it twice, then set it down with care. He is asking if I will speak to a Union Historical Commission, Rook said, about Dragon Diaspora, where we went, what happened to the numbers. Bren said, what do you want to do? Rook was quiet for a long moment. I want to write back, I want to do it carefully. Do you want help? I want you to read it after, to tell me if it sounds like what I mean. Rook composed the letter over 2 days. It was formal, precise, and somewhere in the 3rd paragraph there was a line so dry it was almost a joke, something about the difficulty of providing historical testimony when the primary historians of one's species considered record-keeping a sign of weakness. Bren read it and stopped at that line. This part here, he said. Is it wrong? No, it is very right. I didn't know you could do that. I learned it from watching you, Rook said. You say difficult things in a flat voice, so they land without requiring a response. I have been practicing. Bren thought about that for a moment, then he said, that is either a compliment or a warning. Both, Rook said. I intended both. The letter went out. It was, as Sable noted when she read a copy the first time in recorded Union history, that a governing body had addressed a dragon as a correspondent rather than a subject. She wrote that in her ongoing research notes without dramatic Emphasis the way she wrote everything, but Bren saw her sit with it for a moment before she moved on. Winter came again on a Sunday. There was no drama to it. The temperature dropped. The sky went the color of old iron, and the first real snow started in the early afternoon, fine and steady, the kind that committed. Sable was inside. Bren was on the porch in his coat watching the mountain. He did not wait long. Rook came out of the tree line in the last of the gray light, larger than last year. Moving with the unhurried weight of something that knew where it was going, it came up the slope to the homestead and stopped at the boundary rock, the flat stone where it had left the warm pebble years ago, and looked at Bren on the porch. Bren had the door open before Rook could raise its foot to knock. They looked at each other. Snow was collecting on Rook's shoulders. Neither of them moved for a moment. Then Bren went inside and came back with 2 mugs. He sat down on the porch step. He held one mug out. Rook settled into the lee of the wall the way it always did now. The new shelter for sleeping, the wall for evenings, and took the mug in scaled hands. With the careful precision it had practiced for years. They sat in the snow in the quiet and watched the valley go dark below them. After a while Rook said, "Do you think the Union will decide what to do with me before I am old?" Bren considered, "Probably not." "Good," Rook said, "I prefer this. The uncertainty." "No," Rook said, the door being open. From inside Sable called out something about dinner. Bren called back that he was coming. Neither of them moved for another few minutes. The lights of the settlement were steady in the valley, small and warm and far below. The Galactic Union would spend 11 more years arguing about what Rook was. Bren never changed his answer. Something knocked on a door in the cold. A door opened. That was the whole of it. That was enough.